I never thought I'd be the guy spilling his soul to strangers, but sometimes life throws you a curve so sharp you're left scrambling for answers. My name's Jake, 42, a high school history teacher in a sleepy Ohio town where the biggest drama usually involves a new coffee shop or a zoning dispute. I've been divorced for 5 years, co-parenting my 12-year-old son, Max, with my ex-wife, Sarah, who lives across town. For the last 18 months, I've been dating Emily, 38, a freelance graphic designer with a smile that could melt glaciers and a way of making every moment feel like it matters. We met at a mutual friend's trivia night, laughing over soggy nachos and bonding over our love for forgotten 80s films like The Breakfast Club and Weird Science. Things were solid, better than solid. They were the kind of good you start to build a future around. That is, until one night blew it all apart, thanks to her best friend, Ryan, and a backyard barbecue that exposed cracks I hadn't seen coming. It all started at Emily's place, a charming craftsman house she'd poured her heart into decorating. The backyard was her masterpiece: wildflower beds along the cedar fence, a stone fire pit that glowed under the stars, and delicate string lights that turned dusk into something out of a movie. She'd been planning this barbecue for weeks, agonizing over every detail. A playlist blending Tom Petty and the Pretenders, cedar plank salmon alongside classic burgers, and a sangria recipe she'd tweaked until it was perfect. I pulled up early in my beat-up Ford pickup, the bed loaded with coolers of ice, folding chairs, and a couple of citronella torches to keep the mosquitoes at bay. Emily greeted me with a quick kiss, her hair tied back with a bandana, already bustling around the kitchen. Ryan was there, too, sprawled across her sectional sofa like he was the lord of the manor, sipping an iced coffee and tossing out half-serious critiques of her guacamole. Ryan's 40, a real estate agent with a polished CrossFit bro aesthetic, tailored polos that hugged his biceps, mirrored Oakley's perched on his head, and a perpetual protein shake in hand. He and Emily have been inseparable since high school, when they dated for a year before deciding they were better as friends. He's been her anchor through every major life event. Her parents' bitter divorce when she was 16, her art school years, a devastating broken engagement in her late 20s. She calls him her safe harbor, and I always thought that was sweet, even if his constant presence sometimes felt like a third wheel I hadn't signed up for. I'd met Ryan plenty of times over the past year. At brewery trivia nights, Emily's birthday party where he organized a surprise slideshow of her childhood photos, a group camping trip where he insisted on building the fire himself. He was friendly enough, but there was always an edge, like he was mentally grading me against some invisible rubric. I try to break the ice, ask about his latest condo flip or his training for the Cleveland Marathon, but he'd give clipped answers, then pivot to an inside joke with Emily that left me smiling politely on the sidelines. I figure it was just their history. 2 decades of friendship create a shorthand I couldn't match, and I wasn't about to try. Emily always made me feel like I was enough, so I let it go, telling myself it wasn't worth overthinking. The barbecue started around 5, with about 30 people filling the backyard. Emily's design colleagues, her yoga group, a few neighbors, and a handful of my teacher friends from high school. I took over grill duty, flipping burgers and cedar plank salmon while swapping predictions about the Brown season with Tom, a math teacher who's been my work buddy since I started at Lincoln High. Emily was everywhere, refilling mason jars with sangria, adjusting the playlist when someone requested Prince, her sundress catching the golden light of late afternoon. Ryan held court by the fire pit, regaling a small crowd with a story about a client who tried to buy a lakefront property without checking if it was in a flood zone. His laugh carried, confident and magnetic, and I could see why Emily leaned on him. He had a way of making people feel like they were in on something special. The night felt perfect, like a memory you'd pull out years later to remind yourself what happiness looked like. Then the conversation shifted. It started with Lisa, Tom's wife, who brought up a local school board election that had the town divided. It was a messy issue. Budget cuts had forced tough choices, like slashing arts programs or consolidating 2 middle schools, and a new curriculum mandate had parents on edge. As a teacher, I live this stuff every day, but I'm careful not to turn social gatherings into soapbox moments. Lisa asked my take on the consolidation plan, and I gave a measured answer. Merging schools could save money on facilities, but it risks bigger class sizes and losing the tight-knit feel of smaller campuses. It's a trade-off, not a slam dunk. Ryan, who'd been listening from the fire pit, jumped in like he'd been waiting for an opening. That's a cop-out, Jake. It's not about trade-offs. It's about a board that's been mismanaging funds for years. They're building shiny offices while kids are stuck in trailers. His tone was sharp, less discussion and more lecture, and I caught a few people glancing over, sensing the shift. I kept my cool, sipping my beer. I get the frustration, but the budget's been gutted by state cuts. The board's working with pennies, and most of it goes to salaries and keeping the lights on. Ryan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, beer bottle dangling. Pennies? They just greenlit a new admin wing while teachers are crowdfunding for books. You're telling me that's not a choice. It was a fair point, but his delivery was laced with condescension, like I was a student who'd flunked basic math. I explained how admin costs are often inflated in public debates. Most of the budget is locked into contracts and utilities, not vanity projects. It was a conversation, not a fight, or so I thought. Ryan wasn't interested in nuance. Every point I made, he swatted away with a smirk or a cutting remark. You're missing the bigger picture, he said, interrupting me mid-sentence. It's not about contracts, it's about priorities. Maybe if schools focused on actual education instead of trendy programs, there'd be money for what matters. That hit a nerve. I've spent years staying late to coach kids through history projects, buying supplies out of my own pocket, fighting for my students in a system that's stretched thin. I set my tongs down, wiping my hands on a napkin. Ryan, we can have a real conversation, but you don't get to imply I don't care about my kids. Let's keep this respectful. The backyard went quiet, the kind of silence where you can hear the ice clinking in someone's glass. Emily, who'd been topping off drinks, froze, her eyes flicking between us. Ryan's face flushed, and instead of answering me, he turned to her. You hearing this? Your guy thinks he can school me in front of everyone. It was like I wasn't even there, like I was just a prop in his story. Before I could respond, Emily stepped forward, her voice low but urgent. Ryan, come on, let's not do this. I thought she was shutting him down, but then she looked at me, her eyes pleading. Jake, can you just drop it? Drop it? I barely pushed back, and Ryan was the one throwing jabs. I stared at her, waiting for signs she had my back, but her focus was on Ryan, like he was the one who needed protecting. I tried to keep it light, forcing a half smile. Emily, I'm not the one making this a thing. I just asked for some respect. Ryan scoffed, standing up, his chair scraping against the patio stones. Respect? You're out here acting like you've got all the answers, and I'm supposed to just nod along. He looked at Emily, not me. You know he's full of it, Em. You've always known. That was a cheap shot, and it landed hard. I turned to Emily, expecting her to call him out, to say something to show she wasn't letting him drag me through the dirt. But she just stood there, her hands twisting the hem of her dress, her eyes wide with something close to panic. Ryan, please, she said, her voice trembling. Jake didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it like that? I'd meant every word. I wasn't going to let some guy who'd never stepped foot in a classroom lecture me about my life's work while his best friend played mediator. The hell I didn't, I said, my voice calm but firm. I'm not here to stroke egos, Ryan. We can talk like adults or not at all. Ryan set his beer down with a deliberate thud, his jaw tight. I'm done. Call me later, Em. He stormed through the house, the screen door slamming behind him. Emily flinched, then hurried after him without a glance at me. I stood there, tongs in hand, while the remaining guests pretended to check their phones or sip their drinks. I went back to the grill, flipping salmon and forcing small talk with Tom and Lisa, but the vibe was ruined. Through the kitchen window, I could hear Emily and Ryan, her voice soft and soothing, his sharp and clipped. I couldn't make out the words, but the dynamic was clear. She was chasing him, smoothing his ruffled feathers, while I was left to keep the party from imploding. Guests started leaving early, mumbling excuses about early mornings or babysitters. By 10, the backyard was empty, and I was stacking plates in the sink, the silence heavy with everything unsaid. Emily came back as I was rinsing dishes, her face pale, her arms crossed like a shield. We need to talk, she said, her voice tight. I turned off the faucet, drying my hands slowly to buy time. Yeah, we do. What the hell was that out there? She didn't meet my eyes, staring at the floor instead. You need to apologize to Ryan. I blinked, sure I'd misheard. Apologize? For what? Standing up for myself. She sighed, like I was a kid who'd missed the point of a lecture. You embarrassed him, Jake. In front of everyone. He's upset, and you need to make it right. I set the dish towel down, my hand steady, but my pulse racing. Emily, he was the one throwing punches. I asked for basic respect. Why am I the bad guy here? She shook her head, her voice rising. You don't get it. Ryan's sensitive about this stuff. He feels attacked. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Attacked? He was acting like a jerk, and you're defending him. Has it crossed your mind that maybe he doesn't like me? Her eyes flicked away, and that's when I knew I'd hit a nerve. That's not true, she said, but it sounded hollow. He's just protective. I stepped closer, keeping my tone even. Protective? I'm your boyfriend, Emily. I'm not some creep you need saving from. And if you think I am, then what are we even doing here? She shifted, her arms tightening around herself. It's not like that. Just apologize and we can move on. Or, she trailed off, but the threat was there, heavy as a storm cloud. Or what? I pressed, my voice low. She looked at me then, her eyes hard, and said the words that changed everything. Or we're done. Ryan was here before you, and he's more important than you. It was like the room tilted, the air sucked out in a single breath. Not because I didn't know Ryan was a big part of her life, but because she said it so matter-of-factly, like I was supposed to nod and accept my place as second string. The kitchen felt too small, the hum of the fridge too loud. I didn't yell, didn't slam, anything. Just looked at her, letting the weight of her words sink in. Then I grabbed my keys from the counter, walked to my truck, and drove away. She called after me, Jake, wait. Her voice sharp with panic, but I didn't turn around. My phone started buzzing before I hit the first stoplight. Text, calls, but I silenced it and kept driving, the highway stretching out like a lifeline. The next day was a slog. I had classes to teach, a parent conference about a kid who'd plagiarized a Civil War essay, and Max's soccer practice to coach. I threw myself into it, grading papers during my free period, running drills with the kids until my throat was raw. Emily's texts piled up, 20 by lunch, a mix of apologies and defensiveness. I didn't mean it like that. You're blowing this out of proportion. Can we please talk? I read them in the staff lounge, my coffee untouched, but didn't reply. It wasn't about punishing her. I needed space to process the betrayal, not just her words, but how easily she'd chosen Ryan's ego over our relationship. I kept replaying her face at the barbecue, the way she'd looked at him, not me, like his hurt was the only one that counted. By the third day, the calls had tapered off, but the texts were more desperate. I'm so sorry, Jake. I hate this. Please just call me. I was at home, marking quizzes on the couch, when there was a knock at the door. Through the peephole, I saw Emily, her hair in a messy bun, her eyes red and swollen, clutching her purse like it was a life preserver. I almost didn't open the door, but I'm not built to run from hard conversations. I let her in, but stayed by the door, arms crossed. Can I come in? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. You're already here, I said, nodding toward the living room. She sat on the edge of my couch, the same spot where we'd spent nights binge-watching the X-Files, her head on my shoulder, her laughter chasing away the day's stress. Now she looked out of place, fragile, like a guest who'd wandered into the wrong house. I'm sorry, she started, her hands twisting in her lap. What I said was awful. I didn't mean it. I leaned against the wall, keeping distance between us. You didn't mean it, Emily. That's why it cut so deep. You said what you've always thought, that I'm second to Ryan. Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't move to comfort her. He's been there forever, she said. Through my parents' divorce, my ex, everything. He's like family. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I understood. I'm not asking you to cut him out. What I'm asking is why keeping him happy means throwing me away. Why I have to apologize for existing. She looked down, her fingers picking at a loose thread on her purse. I was upset. I hate seeing him hurt. I sat across from her, on the coffee table, forcing her to meet my eyes. And what about me? Do you hate seeing me hurt? Because right now, it feels like I'm just the guy you call when Ryan's not around. She didn't have a real answer. I love you, she said, her voice breaking. Do you? I asked. Or do you love how I fit into your life when Ryan's okay with it? Because the second I challenged him, you were ready to cut me loose. Her tears spilled over, but she didn't argue. I asked the question that had been gnawing at me. Has Ryan ever liked anyone you've dated? Ever? She looked away, her silence louder than any confession. I could have ended it there, but part of me still saw the Emily who'd stayed up until 2 a.m. helping me prep for a history fair, who'd driven an hour to cheer at Max's soccer games, who'd made me believe I could trust again after my divorce. So I gave her a chance. I need time, I said. You need to figure out if you're in this with me, or if you're just keeping me around until Ryan gives his blessing. She nodded, wiping her eyes, and left, promising to give me space but begging me not to give up on us. The next week was a grind. I buried myself in work, lesson plans on the Industrial Revolution, meetings with the principal about next year's budget, coaching Max's team through a tough loss. Emily's texts came daily, short and careful. Thinking of you. Hope you're okay. I replied sometimes, just enough to keep the door cracked, but I was wrestling with my own doubts. My marriage had ended because I'd ignored red flags, stayed too long in a relationship where I was an afterthought. Years of therapy had taught me my worth, and I wasn't going to unlearn it, even for Emily. Max noticed I was off, asked if I was mad at him. I hugged him tight, told him it was grown-up stuff, but his worry lingered, a reminder of what I was fighting for. Then Emily's sister, Lauren, called. We'd only met a few times, at a family brunch, a Christmas party, but she didn't bother with small talk. Jake, I heard about the barbecue. I've been telling Emily for years that Ryan's toxic. He's not in love with her, but he can't stand her having anyone else. He's done this with every guy she's dated. Picks fights, plants doubts, keeps her tethered. I gripped the phone, my jaw tight. Why does she let him? Lauren sighed. Guilt. Habit. He was there when our parents split. When her ex-fiancé cheated. She thinks she owes him her loyalty. It made sense, but it didn't make it easier. She needs to figure this out, I said. I can't be her consolation prize. Lauren agreed, said she was rooting for us, but warned me Ryan wouldn't back off easily. By the second week, Emily asked to meet. I picked a diner downtown, a no-frills spot with vinyl booze and coffee that tasted like it was brewed last week. Neutral ground. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. But there was a spark there, a determination I hadn't seen before. I've been talking to Lauren, she said, stirring her coffee. And thinking about the barbecue, how I handled it. I saw it, Jake, the way Ryan expected me to take his side, and I did, because that's what I've always done. She pulled out her phone, showed me texts Ryan had sent since our fight. They were manipulative, dripping with guilt. You're throwing away 20 years for some guy who doesn't get you. I've always been there, and you're choosing him? One stood out. You'll regret this, Em. He's not worth it. It wasn't just jealousy. It was control, plain and simple. I'm done letting him run my life, she said, her voice steady. I've got a therapist lined up. I want to fix this, not just for us, but for me. I believed her, but I wasn't ready to dive back in. I'm proud of you, I said. But I need to know you're choosing me because you want me, not because you're rebelling against him. We agreed to take it slow, coffee dates, maybe a movie, while she worked on herself. I left the diner feeling cautiously hopeful, but wary, like I was stepping onto a tightrope. Ryan didn't take the shift well. Emily told me he'd started showing up at her house unannounced, leaving voicemails about how she was changing because of me. She blocked his number, but he'd use burner apps or borrow friends' phones, sending texts that swung from apologetic to accusatory. One night, he showed up at her favorite coffee shop, acting like it was a coincidence, but his eyes were too sharp, his smile too forced. Emily held her ground, told him she needed space, but it was clear he wasn't used to hearing no. I started to see the Emily I'd fallen for, fierce, independent. But I also saw how deep Ryan's influence ran, how 2 decades of friendship had conditioned her to put him first. A month later, things took a darker turn. Ryan showed up at Emily's house at midnight, pounding on her door, yelling that she couldn't just erase him. She didn't open the door, called Lauren, who stayed on the phone until he left, his tires screeching down the street. The next morning, Emily filed a restraining order. She was shaken, her hands trembling as she told me about it in my car outside the courthouse. It feels like I'm losing a part of myself, she said, tears streaming down her face. But it also feels like I'm finally free. I held her hand, letting her cry, knowing this was bigger than us. It was her breaking a chain she'd worn for years. We started dating again, slowly. Dinners at quiet restaurants, walks along the river, conversations that dug deeper than they ever had before. Emily was consistent with therapy, and I saw the changes, subtle at first, like how she stopped jumping every time her phone pinged, expecting Ryan's next crisis. She reconnected with old friends, people Ryan had pushed out of her life with his subtle demands for attention. Her laugh was back, brighter, unburdened. I went to a therapy session with her, curious about what she was unraveling. Her therapist talked about codependency, how Ryan had wired Emily to prioritize his needs, how breaking free was like learning to walk after years in a cast. It wasn't just about him. It was about how she saw herself, how she'd let his approval define her worth. Ryan, meanwhile, was unraveling. He'd taken to social media, posting cryptic rants about loyalty and fake friends. A few mutual acquaintances bought his sob story, texting Emily to ask why she'd abandoned him. But most saw through it, especially after he showed up at a mutual friend's party, drunk and ranting about how I'd stolen Emily. Her workplace got involved when he started emailing her from his company account. Long, faux professional messages that were really just pleas for attention. Her HR department blocked his email, added his name to a security list, and coached her on documenting everything. It was a wake-up call, showing Emily who her real friends were and who'd been swayed by Ryan's charm. 6 months later, we're in a place I didn't think we'd reach. Emily's still in therapy, still peeling back the layers of Ryan's influence. The restraining order's active, though Ryan's gone quiet, at least for now. He's tried to rewrite history, telling mutual friends I brainwashed Emily, but the truth is out. The people who were at the barbecue, who saw his tantrum and her panic, know what went down. Emily's apologized for that night more times than I can count, but I've told her it's not about apologies. It's about what she does next. And what she's done is show up every day, building something real with me, free of Ryan's shadow. We're planning to move in together in a few months, a step that feels right after everything we've been through. Max is on board. He started calling Emily M and asked when she's coming over for pizza nights. We're not perfect. We bicker about dumb stuff, like whose turn it is to do dishes or whether pineapple belongs on pizza. It doesn't. But it's different now. There's no third wheel, no unspoken loyalty test. That barbecue wasn't about school boards or bruised egos. It was about a woman who'd been taught to put someone else first and a man who refused to settle for less than he deserved. Walking away that night saved us, gave Emily the space to see Ryan for what he was, and reminded me that love isn't about competing. It's about knowing your worth and holding out for someone who sees it too. So what do you think? Did Jake and Emily's story hit home? If you enjoyed it, give us a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and ring the bell for more real-life drama and heartfelt moments. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Would you have walked away like Jake or given Emily another chance? See you in the next one.